Poor Harry. Alright. Harry lay awake for hours that night. Through a gap in the hangings round his four-poster, he watched snow starting to drift past the tower window and wondered, could he be the descendant of Salazar Slytherin? He didn't know anything about his father's family, after all. The Dursleys had always forbidden questions about his wizarding relatives. Quietly, Harry tried to say something in Parseltongue. The words wouldn't come. It seemed he had to be face to face with the snake to do it. And how would he know anyway, right? Because he doesn't even know that he's speaking a different language. Quietly, Harry tried to say something in Parseltongue. The words wouldn't come. But I'm in Gryffindor, Harry thought. The Sorting Hat wouldn't have put me in here if I had Slytherin blood. Ah, said a nasty little voice in his brain. But the Sorting Hat wanted to put you in Slytherin, don't you remember? Harry turned over. He'd seen Justin next day in herbology, and he'd explained that he'd been calling the snake off, not egging it on, which he thought angrily pummeling his pillow. Any fool should have realized. By next morning, however, though, the snow had begun in the night and had turned into a blizzard so thick that the last herbology lesson of the term was cancelled. Professor Sprout wanted to fit socks and scarves on the mandrakes, a tricky operation she would entrust to no one else, now that it was so important for the mandrakes to grow quickly and revive Mrs. Norris and Colin Creevey. Harry fretted about this next to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, while Ron and Hermione used the lesson off to play a game of wizard's chess. "For heaven's sake, Harry," said Hermione, exasperated as one of Ron's bishops wrestled her knight off his horse and dragged him off the board. "Go and find Justin, if it's that important to you." Harry got up and left through the portrait hole, wondering where Justin might be. The castle was darker than it usually was in daytime, because of the thick, swirling grey snow at every window. Shivering, Harry walked past classrooms where lessons were taking place, catching snatches of what was happening within. Professor McGonagall was shouting at someone who, by the sound of it, had turned his friend into a badger. Resisting the urge to take a look, Harry walked on by, thinking that Justin might be using his free lesson to catch up on some work, and deciding to check the library first. A group of Hufflepuffs, who should have been in herbology, were indeed sitting at the back of the library, but they didn't seem to be working. Between the long lines of high bookshelves, Harry could see that their heads were close together and they were having what looked like an absorbing conversation. He couldn't see whether Justin was among them. He was walking towards them when something of what they were saying met his ears, and he paused to listen, hidden in the invisibility section. "So, anyway," a stout boy was saying, "I told Justin to hide up in a dormitory. I mean to say, if Potter's marked him down as his next victim, it's best if he keeps a low profile for a while. Of course, Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen ever since he let it slip to Potter that he was Muggle-born. Justin's actually told him that he'd been down for Eton. That's not the kind of thing you bandy about with Slytherin's air on loose, is it?" "You definitely think it Potter, then, Ernie?" said a girl with blonde pigtails anxiously. "Hannah," said the stout boy solemnly, "he's a parcel mouth. Everyone knows that's the mark of a dark wizard. Have you ever heard of a decent one who could talk to snakes? They called Slytherin himself Serpent Tongue." There was some heavy murmuring at this, and Ernie went on. "Remember what was written on the wall? Enemies of the air beware. Potter had some sort of run-in with Filch. Next thing we know, Filch's cat's attacked. That first year, Creevey was annoying Potter at the Quidditch mat. Oh no, all of the clues stack against him. Taking pictures of him while he was lying in the mud. Next thing we know, Creevey's been attacked." "He always seems so nice, though," said Hannah uncertainly. "And, well, he's the one who made you-know-who disappear. He can't be all that bad, can he?" Ernie lowered his voice mysteriously. The Hufflepuffs bent closer, and Harry edged nearer so that he could catch Ernie's words. "No one knows how he survived the attack. By you-know-who. I mean to say, he was only a baby when it happened. He should have been blasted into smithereens. Only a really powerful dark wizard could have survived a curse like that. He dropped his voice until it was barely more than a whisper and said, "That's probably why you know who wanted to kill him in the first place. Didn't want another Dark Lord competing with him. I wonder what other powers Potter's been hiding." Harry couldn't take it anymore. Clearing his throat loudly, he stepped out from behind the bookshelves. If he hadn't been feeling so angry, he would have found the sight that greeted him funny. Every one of the Hufflepuffs looked as though they'd been petrified by the sight of him, and the colour was draining out of Ernie's face. "Hello," said Harry. "I'm looking for Justin Finch Fletchley." The Hufflepuffs' worst fears had clearly been confirmed. They all looked fearfully at Ernie. "What do you want with him?" said Ernie, with a quavering voice. "I wanted to tell him what really happened with the snake at the Dueling Club," said Harry. Ernie bit his white lips and then, taking a deep breath, said, "We were all there. We saw what happened." "Oh, then you noticed that after I spoke to the snake it backed off," said Harry. "All I saw," said Ernie stubbornly, though he was trembling as he spoke, "was you speaking parcel tongue and chasing the snake towards Justin." "I didn't chase it at him," Harry said, his voice shaking with anger. "It didn't even touch him." "It was a very near miss," said Ernie. "And in case you were getting ideas," he added hastily, "I might tell you that you can trace my family back through 9 generations of witches and warlocks, and my blood's as pure as anyone, so—" "I don't care what sort of blood you got," said Harry fiercely. "Why would I want to attack Muggleborns?" "I've heard you hate those Muggles you live with," said Ernie swiftly. "It's not possible to live with the Dursleys and not hate them," said Harry. "I'd like to see you try it." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the library, earning himself a reproving glare from Madame Pince, who was polishing the gilded cover of a large spellbook. Harry blundered at the corridor, barely noticing where he was going. He was in such a fury. The result was that he walked into something very large and solid, which knocked him backwards onto the floor. "Oh, hello, Hagrid," Harry said, looking up. Hagrid's face was entirely hidden by a woolly, snow-covered balaclava, but it couldn't possibly be anyone else, as he filled most of the corridor with his moleskin overcoat. A dead rooster was hanging from one of his massive gloved hands. "All right, Harry," he said, pulling up the balaclava so he could speak. "Why aren't you in class?" "Cancelled," said Harry, getting up. "What are you doing here?" Hagrid held the limp rooster. "Second one killed this term," he explained. "It's either the foxes or a blood-sucking bugbear. And I need the headmaster's permission to put a charm round the hen coop." He peered more closely at Harry from under his thick, snow-flecked eyebrows. "You sure you're all right? You look all hot and bothered." Harry couldn't bring himself to repeat what Ernie and the rest of the Hufflepuffs had been saying about him. It's nothing," he said. "I'd better get going. Hagrid, it's Transfiguration next, and I've got to pick up my books." He walked off, his mind still full of what Ernie had just said about him. Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen ever since he let it slip to Potter that he was Muggle-born. Harry stamped up the stairs and turned along another corridor, which was particularly dark. The torches had been extinguished by a strong icy draught which was blowing through a loose window pane. He was halfway down the passage when he tripped headlong over something lying on the floor. He turned to squint at where he'd fallen over, and it felt as though his stomach had dissolved. Justin Finch Fletchley was lying on the floor, rigid and cold, a look of shock frozen on his face, and his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. And that wasn't all. Next to him was another figure. The strangest sight Harry had ever seen. It was nearly headless Nick, no longer pearly white and transparent, but black and smoky, floating immobile and horizontal, 6 inches off the floor. His head was half off, and his face wore an expression of shock identical to Justin's. Harry got to his feet, his breathing fast and shallow. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to get some water because my sparkling water is just making it harder for me to talk. Okay, I'm back. I got some tea. It's brewing right here. And look at my cup. The Wizarding World of Harry Potter. Look at that. I got this in Florida at Universal Studios at the Harry Potter World. And, yeah. I guess that's the end of that story. It's a great story, I know. A wonderful, fantastic, amazing story. Okay, I am rolling over my blanket. There's gotta be a better way to do this. Here we go. Alright. Harry got to his feet, his breathing fast and shallow, his heart doing a kind of drum roll against his ribs. He looked wildly up and down the deserted corridor and saw a line of spiders, scuttling as fast as they could away from the bodies. The only sounds were muffled voices of teachers from the classes on either side. He could run, and no one would ever know he had been there, but he couldn't just leave them lying there. He had to get help. Would anyone believe he hadn't had anything to do with this? He stood there, panicking. A door right next to him opened with a bang. Peeves, the poltergeist, came shouting out. "Why, it's Potty wee Potter!" cackled Peeves, knocking Harry's glasses askew as he bounced past him. "What's Potter been up to? Why's Potter lurking?" Peeves stopped halfway through a mid-air somersault upside down. He spotted Justin and nearly headless Nick. He flipped the right way up, filled his lungs, and before Harry could stop him, screamed, "Attack! Attack! Attack! Another attack! No mortal ghost is safe! Run for your lives! Attack!" Crash, crash, crash! Door after door flew open along the corridor, and people flooded out. For several long minutes there was a scene of such confusion that Justin was in danger of being squashed, and people kept standing in on nearly headless Nick. Harry found himself pinned against the wall as the teachers shouting for quiet. Professor McGonagall came running, followed by her own class, one of whom still had black and white striped hair. She used her wand to set off a loud bang which restored silence and ordered everyone back into the classes. No sooner had the scene cleared somewhat that Ernie, the Hufflepuff, arrived panting on the scene. "Caught in the act!" Ernie yelled, his face stark white, pointing his finger dramatically at Harry. "That will do, Macmillan," said Professor McGonagall sharply. Peeves was bobbing overhead, now grinning wickedly, surveying the scene. Peeves always loved chaos. As the teachers bent over Justin and nearly headless Nick examining them, Peeves broke into a song. "Oh, Potter, you rotter, what have you done? You're killing off the students, you think it's good fun." "That's enough, Peeves!" barked Professor McGonagall, and Peeves zoomed away backwards with his tongue out at Harry. Justin was carried up to the hospital wing by Professor Flitwick and Professor Sinistra of the astronomy department. Oh, there's a character you never see in the movies. But nobody seemed to know what to do for nearly headless Nick. In the end, Professor McGonagall conjured a large fan out of thin air, which she gave to Ernie with instructions to waft nearly headless Nick up the stairs. This Ernie did, fanning Nick along like a silent black hovercraft. That's such an odd sight. This left Harry and Professor McGonagall alone together. "This way, Potter," she said. "Professor," said Harry at once, "I swear I didn't." "This is out of my hands, Potter," said Professor McGonagall curtly. They marched in silence around a corner, and she stopped before a large and extremely ugly stone gargoyle. "Sherbet lemon," she said. This was evidently a password, because the gargoyle sprang suddenly to life and hopped aside as the wall behind him split in two. Ooh! Even full of dread for what was coming, Harry couldn't fail to be amazed. Behind the wall was a spiral staircase which was moving smoothly upwards like an escalator. As he and Professor McGonagall stepped onto it, Harry heard the wall thud closed behind them. They rose upward in circles, higher and higher, until at last, slightly dizzy, Harry could see a gleaming oak door ahead, with a brass knocker in the shape of a griffin. He knew where he was being taken. This must be where Dumbledore lived. Yes, this is our first time in the book series going to Dumbledore's office. Oh, it will be one of our favorite places in the future. Oh my, that was a great chapter. So many things happen in that chapter. We see Harry being enraged, having to duel Malfoy. Oh, I forgot to show you this picture. Of the winter storm. Oh my, how exciting. Very exciting. We're getting really into the thick of the plot. We get to see Dumbledore's office next. Everyone seems to think Harry is responsible for opening the Chamber of Secrets. Poor Harry. So sad. Maybe he is responsible. I mean, he didn't know he spoke Parseltongue. What else does he not know about? Maybe he's doing it in his sleep? Who knows? Anything's possible. Or maybe it's Malfoy and he's framing Harry. I don't know. Could be anyone really at this point. But you know what?